us find peace. Let us find love.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you. So looking for our affirmation. There it is. Okay. The Christ in me sets me free to enjoy life. So tell me, why do we do these affirmations? Because they're true. Right. Not to make them true, but because they are true, right? And we do them 3 times to kind of align with that truth. So if you will state them with me. The Christ in me sets me free to enjoy life. Yeah, I'm not convinced. You believe that. All right, let's do it a second time. The Christ in me sets me free to enjoy life. Okay, this 3rd time. Say it like you mean it, honey. The Christ in me sets me free to enjoy life. Isn't that true? So this has been a month, hasn't it? February. The weather's been all over the place. Lots of celebrations. Some of you might have celebrated Friday night, Valentine's Day. Maybe some of you gals did the Galentine. Yeah. Well, we are also celebrating Black History Month. Now, that's a time where we acknowledge and honor all of those African Americans whose passions and gifts, talents, and their faith have really shaped this nation into becoming closer to the nation it was meant to be. Now, we're not there yet, right? And for some of us, it may seem like we're kind of way far off from there, maybe even regressing. But I believe that more of us are becoming builders of that beloved community, those ideals that are held in the foundation of this country, our Constitution. Now, we just need to get rid of some of that shoddy construction and faulty wiring that we placed on top of that, don't we? Right? Some of that systemic biases that we still have. Now, Black History Month was actually started in 1926, and it was a week in February known as Negro History Week, and it encompassed the birthdays of both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Now, Frederick Douglass was a slave in Maryland, and after several attempts, eventually escaped and became a leader in the abolitionist movement. But Negro History Week was started by Carter Woodson, who was an African-American, Harvard-educated historian. Now, his parents were former slaves, and he credits his father for the course that his life took, because his father insisted that to accept an insult, to compromise on principle, to betray your fellow man or your people is to lose your soul. It is to stay imprisoned. So Woodson believed that Black history was a political act that would break down the prejudices that divided the country and teach universal love without distinction of race, merit, or rank. Now, he didn't believe that just knowing about a Black inventor would inspire white magnanimity. No, but he believed that the failure to acknowledge Black people as the fellow architects of this United States was and is an existential threat to this nation we call home. And so we hear this word freedom. A lot of things pop into our head, right? Ask children about freedom, and it's about getting to do all these things our parents say they can't do, right? But what is the value of freedom? What is the gift of freedom? Well, what I have learned and continue to learn is that freedom is really an inside job first. To know true freedom is to know who I am first. And knowing that I am a child of God, gifts me with a new way of seeing not only myself, but everybody, seeing you and you. But it also gives me a new way of being in this world. Now, this was true of the enslaved Africans. You know, when the white colonists came, because we had slaves before we were the United States, we were still colonies. The white colonists went in to save the souls of the African slave, because they believed it would make them a better slave, more docile, more obedient. And so they preached their version of Christianity. But the slave heard something else. The slave heard in those stories that they were created equal, that the same God that made the white man was the same God that made them, that this God created them equal. And so those who embraced the Christian tradition, because not all of them did, but those who did started to break down those hypocrisies and what they had been taught. They started to reconstruct it, kind of pull out some of that faulty wiring, and build a Christian tradition that met their spiritual needs. And they linked that to physical freedom, because to them, the Christian tradition was a free existence. They heard something different. That shift in consciousness allowed them to see themselves differently and empowered them to start to shape their world a little differently. And so they began to learn to read and write, until that too was banned. And so out of that, what was developed were these, what were called invisible institutions, which were known as hush harbors. And those hush harbors served as an opportunity to link their religious development, that spiritual growth, with physical freedom. You know, they understood that faithful service to God was about treating each other better. Yes. And that is what was going to liberate them from slavery. You see, and out of these institutions grew the black church. And out of the black churches grew our civil rights movement. So, freedom. This revelation of truth that the slaves experienced is told throughout the stories in the Bible. And in one of these, in the book of Isaiah, now the book of Isaiah, they don't know who all the authors are, but in the chapters that I'll be reading from, this is called 2nd Isaiah. And this is a time when the Jews had been exiled, their homeland had been destroyed, the temple had been destroyed, and they were living under oppression in Babylonia. And this Isaiah started his ministry after about 40 years of being in Babylonia, and the people were disheartened. They didn't believe they would ever be free. They had lost hope and faith. But Isaiah knew who he was. And so in his speech to his people, he says, you know, it's to be free, we have to understand who we are. That shift in consciousness is the only thing that is going to set you free. And so in the hymn of praises, he speaks that God speaks to you. Listen. Listen to that voice. Isaiah 42:16. For God tells us, I will lead the blind in a way they did not know. I will guide them on unfamiliar paths. I will turn darkness into light before them and rough places into level ground. These things I will do for them, and I will not forsake them. Freedom. So today, many of you noticed I'm wearing a stole. It's a kente cloth stole. These were given to those of us who graduated or were ordained last June at Unity Village from the Unity Urban Ministerial School, which I'm a graduate of, and I'll be ordained this year. And this is in honor of Reverend Ruth Mosley, who started this school 40 years ago last year. June 2019 was 40 years ago the school started. It was also in honor of the 400th year of the beginning of the slave trade. Now, in the Gems of Wisdom, you'll find some information about Ruth Mosley, Reverend Ruth Mosley. And there's some articles on unity.org written by Reverend Sandra Campbell, the director of our school, about her. Now, she was born 1930 in Olive Branch, Mississippi. This is a time during Jim Crow laws. And there were two churches in this town, very small town. One of them was named Halliburton Baptist, and the other one's name was the White Church. So you know which church she went to, right? The Halliburton Baptist. They made it quite clear which church you could go to based on your skin color. Well, as a young child, one of her chores was to walk a mile to the dirt road to the mailbox. And on one of her long walks, she found this pamphlet on the ground, picked it up, and started reading. And it talked about this God of pure love, this pure unconditional love without any distinction of your skin color or your economic status. And so it made her wonder if there were really two gods, this one that was vengeful and jealous, and this other one that was just pure love and loved her just as she was. Well, this created a little shift in that young girl. Eventually, she leaves Olive Branch and makes her way to Detroit. And she starts attending the Detroit Unity Temple there. And finds she is called to ministry. She starts Westside Unity Church there and is ordained in 1966. Well, in 1978, there had been an article written by Reverend Johnny Coleman, who by this time had her own church and had left Unity and had her own church based on Unity teachings. But the article was about Unity's discriminatory practices. And so the minister of the Unity Chapel came to Reverend Ruth and said, "What can we do to help your people?" And she said, "Build us a school." So she, through many hoops that she had to go through, but she never lost her focus because God spoke through her and she knew who she was, and she stayed committed and focused to her purpose and knew that the school was going to be built. And in 1979 it was, and we celebrated, as I said, 40 years. But she did more than that. She built a community. She became a builder because she knew that her foundation was God. So she wasn't just a believer. She became a builder. That freedom of knowing who she was led her into doing that which she saw. Now, you might be asking, what do these stories have to do with me? What's the relevance to my life today? Because a lot of you know that, change your thoughts, you change your life. But do we really know that? Have we really experienced that? The narratives of the people in the Bible, the narratives of the slaves, and of all those we celebrate this month, came from knowing who they were. It was about freedom and an awareness of who they were. But it wasn't just that awareness. We know that we're children of God. But what does that mean to us? What is our responsibility? You see, those black churches weren't just about building a religious institution. They were about liberation. They were about building a beloved community. They built community that empowered them to change lives. They became builders. They moved from believers to builders. That's what the gifts of freedom are. Not only seeing ourselves differently and seeing others differently, but being differently by being builders, using our gifts and being builders. I have learned that if I want that beloved community that works for all, I have to remove some of that shoddy construction and faulty wiring that I have within myself. And learning about some of those unconscious biases that I had, because I never considered myself a person that was prejudiced. And because of that, I didn't allow for growth to happen. I didn't think I had biases, and so I would shut down to any growth that was possible. So we have to open up and understand who we are, who we truly are. Black History Month is about not just one color's history. It's not just about black history. It's about white history too. Our imperfect stories. But we can change the narratives of that going forward. We can change the stories by recognizing who we are and then beginning to recognize that you and you and you and you are all expressions of God. Really seeing you as that pressed forth version of our Creator, and then becoming builders of that community. Because the true gifts of freedom is to enjoy life and making it so for all of us, building that beloved community. So what I would ask you today, how will you use your gift of freedoms? How will you build that beloved community? Use your gifts. Use your passions. And let's do this thing together. Thank you, and namaste.